Well, hey biology, I hope you're doing well when you watch this video. So per my email, we're going to do the next 3 note packets online to save some time, but also to allow us some more freedom in class to really do the debates well as far as Wally and ecology go. And then also we want to have some time to review questions in class and practice problems in class and actually do a little activity next week. So it's going to be a little different, but I think it's worth trying just to save some time and do that. So let's go ahead and jump into note packet 1. This is population ecology. And so first off, what is a population? So when I do these videos, I do want you to pause at moments to kind of think about the answers, maybe write them down on your paper. It's also important to think about, what could I possibly ask on a test or a quiz? And so the first thing, we're dumping into population ecology. So a population is a group of individuals of the same species, in the same area. Okay. And so we're going to be talking about population ecology. So here's a group of the same people, and this is Chinese students taking a test. You can kind of see a lot of different personalities if you want to look into it. I mean, I've seen this in my class. I've seen that in my class. I've seen that in my class. That personality. He's stressing a little bit. So, but here's a case study. We often start off with case studies to try to get our mind in the game. And so here's a case study, okay? China has had a sophisticated culture and productive economy for much of its history. The country's abundant natural resources and use of technology have long supported a large and growing population. So that's what we're talking about. Between 1650 and 1800, China's population doubled from 150 million to 300 million. By the late 1800s, it had reached 450 million. And the country started running out of farmland. So the government started struggling. Population explosion. I mean, would that stress you out? Does that look relaxing or does that look stressful? In the years since, China's population generally kept increasing despite many internal struggles, battles of Western powers, and civil war. One exception occurred between 1958 and 1962. China's leader Mao Zedong enforced a program of agricultural policies called the Great Leap Forward. The result was one of the worst catastrophes in Chinese history. Farmers were not able to supply the food that the large population needed. As a result, as many as 45 million people died. To justify his approach, Mao made an extraordinary statement. When there is not enough to eat, people starve to death. It is better to let half the people die so that the other half can eat their fill. What do you think about that? But almost immediately after the disaster ended, population growth resumed. On average, Chinese women were bearing close to 6 children each. How many siblings do you have? By 1970, China's population had grown to 790 million. The needs of that growing population caused serious social and ecological problems. In response, the government enacted a program to control population growth. They tried to encourage people to marry when they were older and have fewer children. The birth rate fell, but not much. So in 1979, the government set up, here we go, this is going to be really important. I am going to dive into this, a one-child policy. It rewarded families that had only a single child with better access to schools, medical care, housing, government jobs. Couples with more than one child were heavily fined. This policy had been reworked several times and has had several unintended results. In 2005, there were 32 million more males under the age of 20 than females. In traditional Chinese society, sons are preferred. They provide better support for aging parents. So, if a couple gets pregnant, right, they want a boy. So what do you think happens if they find out it's a girl? In 2016, the government relaxed the policy and allowed families to have 2 children. Yet the one-child policy definitely slowed population growth and is still affecting the country. Today, most women have fewer than 2 children on average. This puts China in a better position as it tries to handle its major economic and environmental problems. Many other countries and the world as a whole face the challenge of a large and rapidly growing population. Are there lessons to be learned from China? What can we learn from nature that can help us understand human populations? How does the environment affect the growth of populations and how do populations affect the environment? These are just some of the questions that we'll try to answer, in the coming slides. But let's start off with the one-child policy. I am going to dive into a little biblical integration because it's so important, and it's always a topic. We just went through election season, and it was still a topic that even Florida voted on, and over half the people agreed about the right to abort a baby. And time and space does not offer me the ability to really dive into this subject right here. But just to give you a few brief thoughts, and then we can continue the discussion in class, would love to do that. This is me holding Ava, my second daughter. And when people look at this picture, you can see she has this, they put like ointment on the eyes that has like various properties to help prevent infections and stuff. And this is me holding Ava pretty soon after she was born. She's looking up at me with those bright, big, beautiful eyes. And I think my girls, of course, I'm biased as every parent should be, but I think there's some, the most beautiful girls in the world. But people have looked at this picture and they're like, Mr. Harkle, she looks like a doll. And I'm like, yeah, she really does. Like, she is just so pristine and perfect. And there was nothing that I would, exchange for Ava. Nothing I would exchange for Ella Grace. And so when Ansley and I were finding out that we were going to have our second child, people I would hear this phrase often, like, oh, were you hoping for a boy? Were you hoping for a son? And then when Josiah came along, they're like, oh, do you feel glad that you have a son? Almost as if I was kind of missing something by not having a boy. And I know their intention probably wasn't that, but I was like, well, no, I'm just praying for a healthy baby. I'm not praying for a boy. I know I love being a girl dad. And so, unfortunately, with the one-child policy that China set up, led to many, many girls being aborted. And so there's actually these organizations, and one organization is this: All Girls Allowed. In Jesus' name, simply love her. Created in the image of God. And so just a disclaimer, we will be talking a little bit more about abortion here in a second, but I encourage you to think about it. I encourage you to think about what you think about it. Where does your worldview, where does it land you on this topic? And so here's a thought from Gospel Coalition. It's a great website if you ever want to dive into it. But it's if it's wrong to hurt people because of skin color or gender, why is it okay to hurt them because they're smaller, less developed, or in a different location? And so there's two main thoughts, again, greatly simplifying this discussion, but two main thoughts is it's human, but it's not a person because it can't survive on its own outside the womb. And then autonomy. You're not a person if I don't want you to be. My body, my choice. Okay? And so I do want to dive into a great passage about what the Bible says. So a couple of things about the sanctity, the preciousness, the holiness of human life, because we believe that God designs and weaves us together in our mother's womb. People may decide, to sleep together, but who determines if a pregnancy happens? And Psalm 139 says, you knitted me together. And so now the word of the Lord came to me saying, before I formed you, I knew you. I knew you before I formed you. And he's talking to Jeremiah here. That's true for everyone. And here's a great thought. You ready for this thought? If God knows you before you're even made, then who are you? You're way more than what you do. You're way more than the grades you get or the sports you play or the achievements that you're way more than what you look like. You're way more. Like, if God knows you before any of that even takes place, like, who are you truly? Here's a great passage that talks about the sanctity of human life. In those days, Mary arose and went with haste we're about to come into Christmas time, right? Into the hill country, to a town in Judah. And she entered the house of Zachariah and greeted Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth heard the greeting of Mary. The baby leaped in her womb. Notice that term, baby. Leaped in her womb. John the Baptist is being formed by Elizabeth's body through God's, direction. And Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit, and she acclaimed aloud, blessed are you among women, blessed is the fruit of your womb. Why is this granted to me that the mother of my Lord should come to me? For behold, when the sound of your greeting came to my ears, the baby in my womb leaped for joy. That is the same word that's used for a baby outside the womb. It's the same Greek word. So a baby living outside the womb, being born outside, and a baby inside, according to Luke, is the exact same person. The baby is still a baby, whether it's inside the womb or outside the womb. And John has full reasoning skills right now, and it's amazing. But John, like Jesus, what's amazing about this is we're talking like maybe weeks after Mary, Jesus has begun forming in Mary, obviously the incarnation and God clothing himself with flesh by the Holy Spirit. And so Mary's pregnant for about, maybe like a max a month here. So Jesus is very, very tiny. And John realizes that. And John leaps in her womb and is like, it's Jesus. Jesus had just come through the door. And so it's a beautiful passage that first off shows that John is still a baby, but that also Jesus is fully Jesus, barely forming inside of Mary. Let me talk to the Christians for a second. So what's your history? What's your legacy? Well, in the early world, there was infanticide. Side means to kill, right? And so the killing of infants. And so if there was any reason that a father didn't like the child, maybe even the wrong sex, like a female, if there was like deformities, they could expose the child. It was called exposing the child, and expose the child to the elements. They would just leave it on these trash heaps, the boy or the girl, and let nature do its course. Okay? And so what's your history if you're a Christian? Well, I do want to show you this. I do want to quote. So Roman law and religion and the ethos of the ancient world saw nothing morally wrong with infanticide or abandoning, exposing the newborns. All right, let's go through some of these people. Okay, Cicero, deformed infants shall be killed. The deformity could be an unwanted child, a sickly child, a deformed child, or simply a wrong sex child. Think about the one-child policy. Seneca, a philosopher, someone who thinks really well, right? Mad dogs, we knock on the head. Unnatural progeny, we destroy. We drown even children at birth, who are weakly and abnormal. Even the preeminent and to this day influential Greek philosopher Aristotle recommended that parents should be compelled by law to expose deformed or handicapped babies. Aristotle, the premier philosopher, everyone knows the name Aristotle, right? Pretty much, if you've been in education at all. As to exposing or rearing the children born, let there be a law that no deformed child shall be reared. But on the ground of number of children, hey, there's population ecology. If the regular customs hinder any of those born being exposed, there must be a limit fixed to the procreation of offspring. And if any people have a child as a result of intercourse in contravention of these regulations, abortion must be practiced on it. All right, you can kind of scroll through this website if you want to. But here's the catacombs, these like underground caves, burial sites. And let me show you right here. The catacombs are filled with tiny graves. Sorry, I'm not used to making videos on. But here we go. Are filled with tiny graves. But here's your legacy if you're a Christian, right? With the epitaph, adopted daughter, adopted son of. These inscriptions refer to the many babies. This is the ancient world. The many babies and young children Christians rescued from the trash over the centuries. Tertullian, an ancient church father, says Christians sought out the tiny bodies of newborn babies from the refuse and dung heaps and raised them as their own, or tended to them before they died, and gave them a decent burial. That's your heritage if you're a Christian. Christians were like, nope, not on my watch. And they went out and they got these babies. And they raised them as their own. And if they died, they gave them a proper burial and loved them until the end. And so why did they do this? Because each individual has worth. You have worth because they were created by God. It was foreign to the lies of pagan society, where the state, the tribe, the collective was the only value that they knew. There are numerous tombs of small dimensions in these graves. Okay? Jesus said, let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. The sanctity of human life. We'd love to talk about it more in class. All right, let's look at some other ways, more in the natural world, that population ecology matters. Crab migration. I'll show you some of these videos in class, but it's actually happening. I saw like a little newsreel about it the other day. Here's Christmas Island, but there's like one of the largest migrations of any animal is this red crab migration. I'll show you some videos. It's pretty impressive, but some things to think about when we watch these videos. I'll ask you these in class, but what kinds of biotic or abiotic factors would affect maybe this huge migration? What would a drought or a hurricane, we know all about those in Florida, right? Or the introduction of a predator would have on crab populations? What would happen? Okay, this is pretty crazy. And it's a story about a guy named, I believe his name's Thomas. And so Thomas, Australia, he came from Britain. And so Thomas is on the, in Australia, on his farm. He's getting bored, right? And so what Thomas is thinking about is like, man, I could really use some hunting. I could really use some game, some sport. I'm a little bored. And so he releases, I think it's around 13 or so rabbits. Not a big deal, right? Just rabbits, Australia. Well, rabbits, and I'll show you the video in class, but rabbits have become a huge problem in Australia. They have no natural predators. Their breeding time is very fast. And that can't be. But there's actually a website, and let's just click on the main page, but Rabbit Free Australia. Rabbit Free Australia is a publicly subscribed fund to support research, raise awareness, and encourage on-ground action to eradicate feral rabbits from Australia. And so it is crazy, that's a little creepy, but it's crazy that one guy's action led to a massive invasion of rabbits in Australia. All right. Okay, so sorry about that. 24 hunting rabbits, guy named Thomas. And then you can see through time, they just are completely taking over the continent and they start to release viruses and the mutations and adaptations happen. And so I'll show you the video about the viruses, but they still have a rabbit problem. Okay, even Zika, created in the image of God, right? Formed in the mother's womb. The ancient world, maybe even our world, would say, oh, that child doesn't deserve to live. Expose that child. But Christians wouldn't say that. No, that child has worth, that child has value. But why was Zika such a big deal? Zika is a virus, you can see right there, Zika. And Zika gave, like adults, normal, healthy adults, just a little cold, just a viral infection. But if you were pregnant, and I remember this, and it was a big deal, and it happened around the Brazilian Olympics, it could affect the baby forming in the mother's womb and cause microencephaly, which means underdeveloped skull size. And of course, that led to brain and feeding issues and all the different issues. And this is also population ecology. Why? Because people, mosquitoes, right? Well, mosquitoes are more likely to grow in large populations because of certain biotic and abiotic factors, but also as humans congregate in certain areas, they're more likely to be exposed to mosquitoes, okay? So let's go ahead and get to the notes now in this lecture 1 of this. Here's your objectives. And so ecologists study populations by doing a couple of different things. They study geographic range, density and distribution, growth rate, and age structure. And so the stories of hydrilla, here's an example of this. It's like an invasive plant. A population is a group of organisms of single species that lives in a given area. We already defined that, but if you want to define it again, there you go. That's what we're studying, population ecology. You can see right here, 1950s, introduced species, and then it's just migrating its way up. And so the area inhabited by a population is called geographic range. So a population's range could vary greatly. It could be an entire state, an entire continent, or it could be something small. Like, did any of your Halloween pumpkins start looking like this if you left them out too long? So it could be a bacterial population in a rotting pumpkin. And this is what hydrilla looks like, invasive species. For those who like to go in the water, I'm sure you've seen it. And so it's crazy. But we could be talking about, cod in the entire Western Atlantic. Here's another example of geographic variation. You have the king snake. You have the red milk snake, king snake, eastern milk snake, and then you have this like integrated form, which is kind of like a hybrid in genetics. But you can kind of see king snake likes to be southeast, milk snake, eastern milk snake likes to be northeast, And you could start thinking about questions like, why do they like to be in certain areas? Hopefully you can come up with some of those answers. Hey, why do humans like to be in certain areas? Oh, good old Pinellas County, purple, yay. And so many people, right? So many people in traffic lights and stoplights. But why is that, right? And so this is a little bit of a dated map, but you can kind of see where people congregate. Montana, North Dakota, not really happening, right? People like the big cities. People like Florida, California, right? And then, I mean, look at all this, like, you know. And so here's just for the 2020, 1.7500 people. And of course, they put like many, many dots in these areas. And so that is population distribution, okay? So this would be density and distribution. So population density is the number of individuals per unit area. So we take a unit area and count the individuals, that is density, okay? The population of saguaro cactus and the desert plant has a low density, right? But what about the density of all these shrubs right here? Shrub. It would have a higher density. Distribution or dispersion refers to how individuals are spaced out. You definitely need to know how individuals are spaced out. So you can have uniform, which is kind of like they evenly spread out. I don't know if you ever watched like an emperor penguin video, but they evenly kind of space themselves out to have enough space to, and then when they get, when weather gets really rough, they clump together like this. This is the herd mentality. And then random, of course, a lot of plants are random, right? Just wherever the seed lands and if conditions are favorable. And so what factors affect, you can see the star, important to think about, but what factors affect population growth? Well, population size increases if birth rate and immigration means into an area, goes up. And if it outnumbers the death rate and immigration, which means to exit. And so this brings the population down, this brings the population up, but whichever one's greater will determine population size. Okay. 3 factors: number of births, number of deaths, and the number of individuals that enter or leave. Immigration or emigration. Okay. And so we already talked about this, but immigration, this is just kind of genetics. Y'all remember that stuff? Little a, big A, dominant, heterozygous. We'll get into that down the road. Into an area is immigration, and when they leave, that's emigration. The number of males and females of each age a population contains. This is called age structure. Okay, so you can kind of see what's the difference between circle and rectangle. So go ahead and pause and kind of think that through. And so you can see the arrow kind of giving you a little clue here, but the majority of the population is really young in this country. This is more evenly spread out, right? But really young. And so we would expect which country to grow the most? Well, we expect the circle to grow the most or the rectangle? And pause, answer. And so we would expect this country to grow the most. Why? Because these are pre-reproductive ages, and so these guys are going to grow up based upon demographic transition, and these guys are going to have kids of their own, and so we would expect the rectangle country to grow a lot, okay? And this leads us to different types of growth. So exponential growth is unlimited resources. This is like the rabbits in Australia, right? They get introduced, 20 or so of them, 24 give or take, and then unlimited food, no natural predators, quick reproduction times, exponential growth, even to the point where they've been releasing viruses and stuff into the environment. The larger population gets, the faster it grows, exponential. And it's a J shape. You definitely need to know the shape of the curve, so exponential is a J. Population will become larger and larger and larger. Okay, bacterial populations can grow really, really fast, quickly. Sometimes when a new environment, I'll show you this video about moths up north, but when a few European gypsy moths were accidentally released from a lab near Boston, these plant-eating pests spread across northeastern United States within a few years. Hey, new environment, no natural predators, unlimited food supplies, okay? I'll show you that video in class. But that doesn't happen in real life, right? We run out of resources. Eventually, population growth slows. And so this leads us to a logistic growth. And I would know this graph here. this graph. And so it's logistic growth and S-shaped. Okay, so you can kind of see it starts with the exponential, but then it kind of fluctuates around the carrying capacity, which we'll define here in a second. Why? Because it's all about resources. Eventually, we're going to run out of resources. Okay, and so carrying capacity is this number of individuals of particular species that a particular environment can support through resources. Okay, so once we reach that number based upon the resources around, that's our carrying capacity. And so this is carrying capacity. We're going to go fluctuate up like this because we're going to get too high and we're going to run out of resources and individuals will die. And then too low, we'll have more resources, so we have more energy to survive. And this is kind of where hunting seasons play out. It can be important with that. I'm not going to talk about K and all that. And so reproductive patterns, they're based upon two different strategies. Okay, here's the last little bit. There's K strategists and R strategists based upon different species. They vary in the number of births per reproduction and the age and in the lifespan. And so they're placed into two groups. So R strategies is the rate strategy, and then K strategy is carrying capacity. Okay, so many offspring is an R strategy. It's like a dandelion, right? Little energy to raise the young. This is few offspring, so this is like us. And we invest more energy into nurturing our young, raising them, okay? And so different things about R strategies and K strategies. This is an easy one to contrast the different species about that. Okay. All right, so I hope this was helpful. We'll go through some of these questions in class if you want to like pause and think about this question, and maybe go through some of these answers. But we'll review in class. I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for watching.